Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone who's joining us at this webinar at WBS Leadership Dialogues. We are again privileged to host Mr. Themba Maseko, and our facilitator and leader of this debate is our veteran, Professor Mills Soko. I'm very pleased that we are having Maseko. You know, this is a soldier who's brave, who took a stand when it was not popular, you know, to stand against corruption. We truly thank you, Maseko. You know, you've been a true example of what integrity is. And you've lived through the cost of integrity, and you triumphed at the end. So we are very proud that you've joined us at Wits family. Here, Mr. Maseko is now the head of our Wits School of Business, Wits School of Governance, as he's heading the executive education. So welcome home. Because just a little bit of background, Mr. Maseko is the author of a book, For My Country. We'll hear a lot about that today. And he holds a BA LLB at Wits University. So you're back home, like me, you know. And he's also done an MBA at De Montfort University and a senior executive development program, a joint program from Wits and Harvard University. So he's a Witsie. We're very proud of the fact that you're a Witsie, because this is what we are trying to develop, leaders who are ethical and competent. And he's a former DG in the Department of Public Works, Public Service Administration, and the first head of Gauteng Department of Education, government spokesperson, and the CEO of GCIS, Government Communications Information Services. What I can truly say is that Mr. Maseko is a true epitome of a civil servant, somebody who's really committed to serve this nation as a civil servant, and who's competent and who's ethical. And that was what we are encouraging here at Wits Business School and Wits School of Governance and the entire Wits University, is to develop leaders that are competent and ethical. So thank you very much. I'll hand over to Prof. Mills. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Maurice Hadebe, Professor Hadebe, Director of the Wits Business School, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mills Soko. I'm a Professor of International Business and Strategy at Wits Business School, and I welcome you all to this WBS Leadership Dialogue. When the first reports of the Zondo Commission were released recently, both Professor Hadebe and I felt compelled to take an active role in facilitating public conversations and debate about the implications of the report's findings. I couldn't be more delighted to be hosting this conversation with Themba Maseko, who was the first to stand up to former President Jacob Zuma and the Gupta brothers before it became fashionable to do so. He was and is an outstanding civil servant and will forever be in his debt because of his courageous stand. Such ethical leadership serves as an exemplar to future leaders in government, in business, and across the broader society. Thank you, Themba, for your time today, and thank you to all the guests for joining us today too. You will have an opportunity to ask questions during the conversation. Please use the chat box to write your questions or comments, and I will relay this to Mr. Maseko. In case you miss anything, this event is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel. Good afternoon, Themba.
Good afternoon, Professor. How are you doing?
Good. Good to see you. The theme of today's conversation is state capture and governance. We'll get to that later in the conversation. Right now, I want to explore a number of other aspects of your life and career, including your childhood, political activism, and your stints in the public service. Could you please just tell us about your childhood? You grew up in Dube, in Soweto, and you have said that your parents played a pivotal role in shaping your outlook on life. In which ways did they do this?
Mills, let me start by thanking you and the guests for participating today, but also for the invitation. I just feel extremely humbled to be part of a group of people who have participated in your dialogue. So I feel really humbled and honored to be here. Yes, you're correct. I mean, I talk in more detail about my growing up in Soweto in the book, but basically born and bred in Soweto, spent all my youth in the township of Soweto. So that's all I know. And I grew up, it was just a normal, large family by normal standards in the townships. My parents played a very vital role, and my heart is still bleeding to this day that they never lived long enough to see where I am today. So I owe them a lot of that for that. Three things that come to mind to answer your question. The first one is just the importance of education and improving your lives. That's what my parents actually taught me. My mother never had the opportunity to go to school. She grew up in the rural areas of the then Eastern Transvaal. She never had the opportunity to go to school because girls were not allowed to go to school. So she made it her commitment, her lifelong commitment to all her kids, that she encouraged us to go to school and get education. My father also played a very vital role there. His role was being a prefect, to come back every night, late at night, get a report from a mother who's been to school, who did their homework. If you didn't do your homework, he'll wake you up in the middle of the night and give you a tongue lashing and probably one or two smashes here and there. So they emphasize the importance of education. Secondly, I learned how important unconditional love is that a parent can give to their children. So our parents did not do, I mean, when they never had the wherewithal to give us everything that we wanted, but they made sure that in fact, we never doubted the fact that they loved us unconditionally. And thirdly, and lastly, would be the issue of discipline. And my mother made sure that if she gave you an instruction, you didn't follow it, she will make sure that you actually pay a big price for that by getting a few smacks here and there. My father was also a disciplinarian. So I learned very early on in life that discipline is a very important part of a person's makeup. And I was able to take these things to every aspect of my life as I was growing up. So in short, I am today because of what they were and what they made me to.
As a school pupil, you participated in the Soweto political protests against the imposition of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in Black schools. You've said that you lost your youth forever, during this period, and that on the 16th of June, 1976, that day defined what you became subsequently, what you were to become. Could you please just explain to us, what it was like participating in the student uprising of Soweto, and how this changed your life?
Look, I mean, a lot of us were young kids at the time, get the title of having been activists in June 76. I need to qualify that because in June 76, I was still a kid, 12 years old, going to a high primary school and learning through the grapevine. I never listened to news too much, but the grapevine in the township was that there's a new government policy that we were going to be taught all our education through the medium of Afrikaans as a language of instruction. So I attended a school called Bele Higher Primary School in Orlando West. And we just arrived in June 76 in January, and a teacher walked into the classroom and said, Veskende. And we didn't have a clue what he was talking about. And it was mathematics for those who don't know Afrikaans. And then the next thing we knew was that he conducted a lesson when we didn't have a clue what he was talking about. And as a higher primary school, then we decided to go on a class boycott. So that was as early as March. So by the time June 16, the day arrived, we had been out of class for about 3 months or so because the boycott had started. So on the day of the event itself, June 16, I mean, we knew that there was going to be a big march. And as a kid, I decided to go and participate in the protest because I was opposed to the issue of Afrikaans being introduced as a medium of instruction. And there I went, and in Orlando West, as we were waiting for other students to come, and then there was gunfire, there was screams, people were being shot at, and I saw the largest number of police I've ever seen in my life. And I hid in a church outside Orlando West High School. But what basically happened on that day was that I became an adult. For a 12-year-old to get out of a church after hearing all kinds of screams and gunshots, smelling blood inside of a church, I actually realized that my life would never be the same again. I had been to family funerals as a kid, but I had never seen a dead body lying in the streets. So as I was getting out of the church, there were all of these bodies of young kids in their school uniform with blood coming out of their heads, their blood-stained white shirts and gray trousers. Just had such a huge impact on me as a person. And on that very day, that's when I decided I will become a fighter against apartheid. And that's what, in a sense, turned me into an activist. But at that stage, I make the confession that I was still a kid. I did not know what it meant to be an activist. All I knew was that I was not prepared to tolerate the oppression that we're being subjected to as Black kids growing up in the township.
Well, Professor Hadebe made reference to the fact that you studied here at Wits. You are a VT, and
Yeah.
you know, you earned your BA here and also your LLB, but you nearly did not step foot in this university as your application to register was turned down when you applied for the first time. So it's possible that you could not have studied here because of the conditions that prevailed during that time. Can you please explain why was your application turned down here at Wits, and how did you eventually resolve the problem?
Well, I think the starting point to answer your question would be to just explain that at the time, there was nothing like career guidance given to us as Black kids. And I grew up in a family where nobody had actually passed matric and had been to university. So I went through my schooling without imagining that I would ever go to university. So I thought my life would end with a matric certificate, a senior certificate, and I'll end up being either a policeman or a nurse or even driving a taxi or being just an ordinary kid unemployed in the township. But when I worked so hard for my matric and when the results came out, I realized that in fact, I actually got a matric exemption. And I said, damn, this is a new door opening for me. And I decided to go to university and apply for space because I mean, the closing date for applications had passed. So I arrived at Wits concourse and I arrived there and I said, I would like to apply to study law. And the lady who was working at the admissions office told me that, listen, you're late, firstly, but secondly, this is a white university and you're a Black kid, you're not allowed to study here. And it dawned on me that in fact, my race was denying me access to education. But the lady realized how shocked and disappointed I was. And she said, listen, there's another way you can actually come in. You must apply to the Minister of Education white education to give you permission to study in a white university. It so turned out that the minister at the time was F.W. de Klerk, and the lady was so helpful. She helped me draft a letter, and the letter was dispatched to de Klerk's office. And unfortunately, the response came back and said from de Klerk's office, I don't think he wrote it himself, but the response basically said, unfortunately, you're a Zulu speaker, you're Black, you can't be admitted to Wits University. And they suggested that I apply to the University of Zululand. And that's when I thought another door had actually shut in front of my face, went back home, spoke to my parents, and we decided, listen, de Klerk says we must go to University of Zululand. Let's try that option. And that's when I got into a train, and a few of my friends went to the University of Zululand, and I got admitted there, studied for a year, and I registered for BPROC there. But towards the end of that year, there was violence on campus. Students were protesting against Mangosuthu Buthelezi. We knew him as Gacha then, who was meant to come and address the graduation ceremony as the chancellor of the university. And students did not want him to be there because they saw him as an agent of the homeland system. So there was a protest, and the Inkatha forces, Amabuto, then decided to respond with violence, and there was a clash between students and the Amabutos, the IFP members, and that led to the killing of 4 students and 1 member of the Inkatha impis. And that's when I decided that, in fact, there's no way I could go back to that campus. Remember that I'd spent all my youth in Soweto. I had never been outside of Soweto, outside of Joburg. So this was my first experience of being outside of the then Transvaal province. So we went back to write in 1984, I think. I passed my exams at University of Zululand, and my parents said, listen, try Wits again. I went to Wits, submitted my application, and demonstrated that I had passed. And fortunately, I was admitted to a BA. I wanted to get into a law degree, but they said, you can only be admitted to BA. So I did my BA, and I ended up qualifying with a BA and LLB from Wits. So that's how I ended up being a proud Witsie.
Just to remind our guests that if they have questions or comments, they can type them in the chat box, and I will relay them to our guest, Themba Maseko. So your political activism started early on in your life, but it grew exponentially, after you enrolled at Wits, and you were actively involved in student politics, youth politics, as well as in the national politics through the leadership positions that you held in organizations such as the United Democratic Front, as well as the National Education Crisis Committee. Could you please reflect on some of those defining moments during this period, broadly at Wits and across the country, and how these culminated in the political changes that took place in the early 1990s?
Look, when I got to Wits, I had thought that, in fact, I had arrived and I thought life would change immediately. But when I got to Wits, I discovered that, there were still challenges that I faced as a Black kid arriving at Wits. Firstly, one had difficulties with paying the fees. My parents could not afford, so I had to go and search for bursaries. Secondly, I was living in Soweto, and the commuting from Soweto to Wits on a daily basis was a struggle. So I needed accommodation at Wits, and we found that, in fact, Wits could not accommodate us on campus because campus was still in a white area, so we could not live there. Then there were issues about not having money to buy textbooks. We did not have enough money to actually just buy lunch during lunch breaks at Wits University. So I realized that the struggle actually continues even though I was a university student. So I became active. That's when I started joining student organizations. I joined an organization called Azaso. I joined the Black Student Society, which was an SRC body for Black students on campus. And at the time, we were just a handful of Black students on campus. I think we were less than 10% of the population at the time. And I became active to try and assist other students who were in a similar position as I was. And that landed me with being elected into quite a few senior positions of leadership. I was elected first. I got accommodation at the Glen Thomas residence, which was a residence for Black students in Soweto, just outside Baragwanath. I became a chairperson of the House Committee there. Then it moved on to me being elected as president of the BSS. And I then ended up being elected in regional structures of the student organizations. And that led me to participate in community struggles as well. We worked with the civic associations from Soweto to Alex, because we realized that our fights, our challenges on campus were not too different from the challenges that our communities were experiencing, Black communities. And that took me into politics. I became involved with the establishment of the UDF. We worked with trade unions with training programs, assisting Nehau, for example, to be recognized as a trade union at Wits, at the Wits campus itself. So that's how my activism career got launched. And that's when I got the attention of political organizations such as the ANC, and was recruited into underground structures of both the ANC and the South African Communist Party. So Wits played quite a pivotal role in my growth as a person, as an activist, and beginning to understand politics in general, but also the importance of becoming an activist and trying to make a difference in the lives of ordinary South Africans. So Wits remains a special place in my heart, because that's where I learned to become an activist.
Mm. Now, you know, the 1980s were very dangerous, and it was a very dangerous and turbulent period in our political history. And at some point, you made a decision to leave the country and to join with the intention of joining the ANC's military wing, Mkhonto weSizwe. But you know, your plans did not work out, and you found yourself in serious danger. Could you please explain to us what happened when you tried to, when you skipped the country, and how did you extricate yourself from the dangerous situation that you found yourself in?
Well, that was, you're correct, Mills. That was a difficult time in our country at the time. You will recall that there were states of emergency being declared. Many of our activists were in detention. Many of my own close friends spent many months in detention without trial. And as an activist, your life was in danger. Many activists were being killed in their homes, being abducted. We attend funerals, and people will be shot even during the process of just going to bury your close comrade at a graveyard. So life increasingly became unbearable for many of us. And that's when a few of us decided that the time had come for us to go into exile. So we decided, and we then made plans to leave. But unfortunately, it so turned out that, in fact, our group was infiltrated by an enemy agent. And the person we thought was going to help us to escape the country literally delivered us in the hands of the South African National Defence Force. So we were arrested outside the Ramatlabama border and were taken to prison, and we were locked up for, I think it was, if I recall, about 3 weeks in detention without trial, being subjected to extensive humiliation, punishment, assault by the security branch at the time. So it was one of the first times when I thought my life was actually flashing past my own eyes, when our attempt to escape the country was thwarted. And fortunately, what really saved us was the fact that the security or the defense force who arrested us were not smart enough to put us in different cars. So they put us in one police van. And in the police van, we then concocted a story about who we were, where we were going. And the story was simply that we were trying to leave the country to go and study abroad. So we didn't mention the fact that we wanted to go for military training. That saved us, because when they separated us, when we got to the prison cells, we were able to stick to that story that we're leaving the country to go and study overseas. We denied any links with any attempt to join the ANC or its military wing or the PAC. And that's, in my view, led to us being released after a few weeks. So yes, unfortunately, we had written letters to our parents telling them that in fact we were going to leave the country. So coming back and reconnecting with family and friends was also not an easy process, but in the end, yes, I was not able to leave the country. I've got no regrets about it because I was still able to continue my activism and make a contribution to the fight against apartheid to make sure that we achieve the democracy that we are enjoying as we speak today.
Right. I can see a few questions largely related to state capture. I'll read those questions when we come to that theme, which is the central theme of our discussion today. Right now, I would like to move on to your stint in the public service. Themba, you served in government for 17 years in various senior leadership roles, including as the Director General of the Department of Public Works, head of the Gauteng Education Department, and CEO of the Government Communication and Information System. This is a very extensive experience. It makes you one of the most experienced public servants in the post-apartheid era. What is your understanding of the notion of public service? And what, in your view, constitutes a good public servant? And perhaps in addition to that, you have said that former President Nelson Mandela inspired you to embrace the spirit of an ethos of public service. How did he do this? So this is a three-pronged question. Your understanding of the notion of public service, what constitutes a good public servant, and why do you say former President Nelson Mandela inspired you to embrace the ethos of public service?
Okay, I think the issue of working in the public service, my generation of activists, because we defeated apartheid, the apartheid state, and we got into government. My generation of those of us who joined the public service, we saw our role in government as a continuation of that struggle. And that struggle was essentially about a commitment and a desire, a very deep commitment to improve the lives of all South Africans and to fight poverty, unemployment, inequality. So we thought getting into government was a way of continuing that struggle. So we're driven by a much bigger ideal of improving the lives of our people. So for me, ethos of being a public servant is a privilege and an opportunity to serve your people, your citizens. So we did not go into it to become millionaires. We did not go into public service to make money. We went in there to serve the nation, and we thought it was not a right, but a privilege to be of service to our nation. So we're prepared to give our all, to sacrifice sometimes even our families, to make sure that we make that small contribution to improve the lives, to improve the lives of our people. So my sense is that if the notion of being a public servant, to me, it's essentially about loving your country, loving your people. Hence the title of my book, I say, it is for my country. So it's not just a job. It's not just a way of making a quick buck, but it's about serving your citizens and putting your nation and your country first. So that's my notion of a public servant, that you actually have to give it your all, serve with integrity, commitment, discipline, and put yourself last and put your citizens first. Part of what we try to achieve, and this is where the Mandela part of the question comes in, I think that what Madiba taught us was the importance of serving the nation firstly, but secondly, working very hard to unite our country and our nation, and working with people from different backgrounds. So we learned that, in fact, you don't only need to work with people you like, people that you agree with. Sometimes for the good, the bigger good of building a nation, you even have to work with people who hold different views from yourselves, being willing to compromise And that's some of the traits that we learned from Madiba, to say, put your nation first and do everything required, even if it's something that initially you'd have thought is against your own individual principles. But if it's in the interest of building a single, non-racial, non-sexist, united nation, then you might have to put your own personal views and principles on the side just to make sure that you achieve this bigger goal. And I think that's what led many of us to work with such commitment, dedication, making sure that we're putting our people first ahead of our own personal interest.
There's a question here still on this sub-theme from, let me see, from Lillian Serobatse. Would you say that the ideal to improve lives of South Africans has been lost to many of our public servants? What are your thoughts on the daily treasonous acts of some of the police, army, and home affairs officials in their contribution to the high levels of crime in the country?
Look, I don't think that the ethos is lost. I think what has gone haywire is that because of the advent of corruption that we're experiencing as a nation today, we're beginning to see a lot of that corruption filtering down to all levels of government. And many of the public servants who see their leaders being implicated in corruption with no accountability are starting to believe that, in fact, this is how things are done. And I think that's what all of us should actually be worried about, that we need to turn this whole thing around to stop this perception that you go into government to become rich, to make money, and that if you get involved in corruption, there will be no consequences for you. And that's what we need to address as a matter of absolute agency. And we'll touch this matter later on when we discuss the outcomes of the Zondo Commission. The issue of the role of the police and the army, I think that one of the biggest stresses that we're experiencing as a nation is the advent of crime. The fact that South Africans are not feeling safe in their homes, in their workplaces, in the public spaces, is something that we should all be worried about. And I think that it's reaching a point of being a crisis. I think that our police services, our defense forces can be said not to be doing their job in terms of making sure that South Africans feel safe. And because there's not enough work being done, for instance, by the intelligence services to anticipate criminal activities, the police are then forced to react with brute violence to deal with the situation that we're experiencing. I understand it. I don't necessarily agree with some of the methods used, but some situations do require a demonstration of force on the part of the police to make sure that we begin to send a message to criminals that what is they're subjecting South Africans to is totally unacceptable. We must also remember that one of the biggest failures, in my view, as government, is that we inherited a police force that was trained to use brutal force and violence to deal with all incidents of criminality. And that's going to be with us until we change the mindset of the police services, but most importantly, increase our intelligence capability to make sure that we can act before a criminal incident takes place. But most importantly, when criminals are apprehended, we need to make sure that they are locked up. And because that's one of the major complaints in our communities, especially in the townships, that people go and report crimes, criminals get arrested, and within a matter of days, they are released again, largely because the police have not done their work in terms of investigations. The prosecuting authorities are not ready to prosecute cases. So criminals are actually doing a lot of their things with absolute impunity. So the only way to deal with the issue of crime, reduce the level of violent response by the police, is to retrain our police services to make sure that they become proactive, and we reinstate the whole notion of community police forums so that communities can also get involved, because that's where, at the end of the day, intelligence is going to come from. If communities themselves stand up and say, we know in this particular house, criminals are living there, that's where they plan their criminal activities, and we get the police to be very proactive. So I think that those are some of the things that our security cluster is going to have to be seized with as a matter of absolute agency.
There are quite a few questions here related to the need to build a capable state, and this will form part of our discussion. I'll revisit those questions. Right now, I would like to ask you, Themba, about one of the problems that have crippled government in South Africa, the so-called political administrative interface, right?
Yes.
Which is it's a big problem. The lack of clearly defined roles for politicians on the one hand, and for public servants on the other, and that has led to conflicts, that have driven many public servants out of government. You've also been on the receiving end of this problem. How serious is this problem, and how do you think it can be addressed in the interest of creating a stable and effective public service?
Well, I think the issue of public or political and administrative interface, and I'm doing a lecture on this so I can talk about it a bit. It's essentially about the need to clarify the parameters of the roles between politicians and administrators at all levels, at all spheres of government. Secondly, I think it's important to note that this is not something unique to South Africa. It's a problem across the globe where politicians and administrators end up fighting because there's no clarity about who is responsible for what. In this country, it's a historic problem. We've had a generation of ministers appointed, former activists, many of them with no formal employment experience. You then have civil servants who are employed, also activists such as myself working in government. Then the Constitution says ministers are responsible for implementation or developing policy and implementing policy. But the Constitution expects politicians to delegate this function to the administrators, the DGs, city managers and administrators at provincial level. So what happens is that because politicians do not understand that they are responsible for formulating policies, but they need to delegate these functions to the administrators, you find politicians beginning to think that they can develop policy, identify priorities, and still be involved in implementation. And that's when they end up trampling on the toes of administrators. It gets more serious when you have politicians who also have illicit intentions, that is corruption, who want to then begin to not just make policy, get involved in implementation, but they also want to be involved in the decisions about which tenders must be allocated to which companies. And that's where corruption actually gets into the picture and complicates the factors. So for public service to be efficient and work well, you need to have very clearly demarcated roles and responsibilities so that ministers know what their responsibilities are to develop policy, identify priorities, and then delegate those functions to administrators. And administrators' roles is then to make sure that government functions efficiently and effectively. In our country, the issue gets even more complicated because we have a situation where there's just no clarity, firstly, about the demarcation of these roles. But secondly, you have a situation where a lot of the appointments by ministers of DGs are what we call deployments. So it's political appointments in most cases. And when ministers appoint a DG or a city manager, there is an expectation that the DG will simply take instructions from the minister and not advise the minister to say, Minister, what you are asking us to do is illegal, is illicit, and therefore it cannot be done. So many of these inexperienced officials end up complying and fulfilling the needs of these ministers and end up being implicated themselves in corruption. What we did in 1994 when we came in, you had a generation of DGs who became confident and experienced and were able to say, Minister, but you can make recommendations about policy, let me implement. Minister, it's not your job to recommend a company. There needs to be a proper procurement process that needs to be followed before we can actually appoint a company. Many of the ministers would then see these DGs as being defiant, disloyal, and end up actually dismissing them. So that's what this political interface is about. But as I said, it's global, it's a global problem. What needs to be done is that we need to begin to clarify roles and responsibilities of ministers and directors generals. But also, in my view, it becomes important for us to begin to change the way in which we appoint senior officials in government, where we can begin to introduce an element of meritocracy. So you employ people not because they carry membership of a political party, but because of their experience and expertise, so that ministers can begin to understand that they're employing a professional who's supposed to be implementing programs of government and not simply officials who are loyal to a party or to an individual minister. And when these DGs are appointed, you then also need to review the regulatory framework that says, if a DG says no to a minister, we can't break the law. What sort of protection needs to be given to that official so that they will not end up losing their job because of doing the right thing? And here my example is very instructive, and I go into details in my book about it, that Zuma, or former President Zuma, asked me to meet the Guptas and assist them without telling me what he wants me to assist them with. I then go and meet the Guptas, and the Guptas tell me they want me to collect the advertising budget and then transfer it to their company. So the instruction from Zuma, it may not have been direct to say, take money and give it to the Guptas. It simply says, assist the Guptas. When I get to the Guptas, they tell me how they want me to be assisted. And as a good, loyal public servant, I thought this was incorrect, improper. And that's when I decided I was going to defy both former President Zuma and the Guptas. Now, that's the kind of public servant, in my view, that we need, that can have loyalty to the Constitution, have loyalty to servicing the nation, and be able to say no if a minister is coming up with an illicit, improper, and in most cases, even an illegal instruction. So we need to change the regulatory framework. We need to make sure that we introduce meritocracy. We also need to begin to make sure that, public servants who are appointed are people who will have absolute loyalty to the Constitution. And lastly, one of the major difficulties we're experiencing as a nation is that the term of office, and I'm talking about national departments now, is reduced to 3 years. It used to be during my time in the early years, DGs were appointed for a 5-year period, but now it's been reduced to 3 years. And that means people who are appointed as DGs do not have security of tenure. So if you challenge a minister, you know that there are greater chances of your contract not being extended beyond 3 years. So it then exposes these DGs to say, let me take a chance and implement what this minister is asking me to do because I want my contract to be extended. And that's part of what we need to reform and make sure that we improve and increase the security of tenure of senior officials in government. So those are some of the changes that we need to take into account. But importantly, let's understand that the issue of conflicts between ministers and DGs, MECs and HODs, mayors and city managers is not something that's unique to South Africa. It's a global problem. We need to codify it and regulate it and make sure that we can manage it in a much more transparent way.
I want to move on to state capture and the Zondo Commission, but before I do so, may I ask a question about your relationship, as an experienced civil servant who worked very closely with several heads of state in this country, with the exception of former President Zuma. So you work very closely with former presidents Mandela, Mbeki, and Motlanthe. Of the 3 political leaders that you served, who made the biggest impression on you and why?
Well, I must say the one who made the biggest impression is former President Mbeki. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I have never come across an individual who put so much energy and time to the issues of governance that we're facing our nation. In other words, he was one person who wanted to make sure that we get our policies right, policies that are aimed at improving the lives of ordinary people, the poor, unemployed, address issues of inequality. And he pushed government departments, he pushed ministers to make sure that they focus their attention on the correct policies to be adopted. But secondly, he made sure that when we develop policies, we also understand how those policies were to be funded. In other words, which resources are going to be required. And thirdly, you also wanted us as senior officials to make sure that we build the capacity in our departments to implement those policies. Now, here you are having a head of state who was paying so much attention to detail about issues of governance. And he was also able to demonstrate decisiveness on policy issues. If a minister of finance comes and presents a document to him, he would go back, spend the whole night reading that document, come back the following day with a very detailed response to that document. Many DGs complain about the fact that he used to call them in the early hours of the morning to question them about the documents that they'd submitted to him for approval. So he paid that level of attention to detail about issues of governance. And I believe that, in fact, he played a very vital role in building the capacity of the state. And I think that we're able to, there were mistakes. I mean, I'm not going to deny that even during his term, but he made the biggest impression on me. And that's when I also learned the trait of making sure that you prepare thoroughly for meetings, you read documents. When you submit documents to him, you make sure that you've done your work in detail, because you're going to present a document and you will find that he knows more about the subject you're briefing him about than you as a person. So they need to prepare, work hard, read, and make sure that you apply your mind to issues even before you go into a meeting is something that I learned from him. And I don't think there's actually a head of state around the world who actually paid so much detail to issues of policy, governance, resource allocation, and skills. So that's the impression that he made on me as a head of state.
Okay, so now we move on to state capture. Themba, it's May 2010, you receive a call from former President Zuma. The much talked about call, and you end up meeting with Ajay Gupta in his 16-ward residence. Now, this turned out to be an extraordinary meeting that set in motion, a series of events that would ultimately culminate in you being fired from your job. Could you please sketch a picture, for us of that meeting and why it was extraordinary from a public governance point of view?
Mills, that meeting still haunts me to this day because of the way it unfolded. I mean, those who've read the book will know that I say he had been trying to set up a meeting with me for many months, and because I'd heard that he was actually involved in some dodgy stuff, I delayed meeting with him, but eventually I decided to meet him. And then on the day, strangely, as I was driving out of the office to go to the meeting with Ajay Gupta, I get this call from former President Zuma to say, hey, there are these Gupta brothers who need your help, please help them. I was amazed by that call because, I mean, I had been with Zuma, I think for more than a year. Yeah, for more than a year, I've been in government with him for more than a year, and he had refused to have a meeting with me. He had never called me. So this was the first call that Zuma makes to me. That was fascinating. But secondly, he then says, go and meet with these people. And I said, Mr. President, I'm actually on my way to have a meeting with these guys. So when the call, which lasted less than 2 minutes, I started wondering, why is this call coming? Is this a way of Ajay Gupta demonstrating to me that he's got power, he's got connections to the head of state? And part of me said, just abandon the meeting and not go. But I said, no, let me just go and give him a hearing. When I get to the house, I meet this man. I must say, and I say this in the book as well, I found him to be the most arrogant, brazen human being I've ever met in my life. This is the man who called me to his house. I agreed to meet him, and all he says, listen, I don't have enough time. This is what I want from you. I'm setting up a media company. I want all the government advertising budget to be transferred to my company, and that's your job. I want you to do that. And I say, Mr. Gupta, listen, that's not how things work. Firstly, there has to be procurement. Secondly, the budget doesn't sit with GCIS, it sits with other departments. So if I want this budget, I want to control it, I must go to all these departments, get it, and then give it to you. And that's not how things are done. Within a few minutes, I realized that I was talking to myself because this man wasn't listening to what I was saying. So he said, listen, I'm not interested in all of that. All I want you to do is to go to these ministers and their departments, tell them to transfer their budgets to you. If they refuse, come back and tell me, and I will sort them out. And then he went on to tell me that he can summon ministers into his house. He told me that he has weekly meetings with former President Zuma in that house. So if there's a minister who defies, who doesn't want to cooperate with me, I must come back to him. And I just found this to be so unacceptable because this is a man who doesn't work in government. So he's already treating me as a little child, asking me to come and report to him. Secondly, he was talking about my ministers, my leaders at the time, and talking about them as if they were little kids, that he'll give them instructions. And at that point, that's when I decided there's no way I will deal with such an arrogant person, even if it means I lose my job. There's no way I'll actually be part of this criminality, because I could see what he was asking me to do was to help him steal money from the public purse. And I decided there and then that I was not going to cooperate with him. So that was probably the worst meeting I've ever had ever since I've been a civil servant for, as you say, 17 years or so. So that meeting to this day haunts me, and I'm glad I was able to actually record it in a book.
You paid a price for your defiance, and eventually you were fired from your job. You went through a long period of silence, and decided to speak up, to speak out, and blow the whistle on the former president and the Guptas. The question is, why did you decide to speak out, and why did it take you so long to do so?
Look, at the time, I mean, there were rumors and in the government corridors about the Guptas actually taking charge of the reins of government. But as an individual, I had not realized that, in fact, there was a bigger scheme that was unfolding. So I thought I was being targeted because I was in GCIS. GCIS was under the presidency, and these guys were close to the President Zuma. So I was being targeted as an individual. So I never understood what was unfolding. And then as I sat home after leaving government and being unemployed, I then realized that, in fact, there was something bigger unfolding there. That's when I saw the Guptas landing a plane at the waterproof military base. Then I saw Mcebisi journals talking about the fact that he had been offered 600 million rands as a bribe to cancel one of the SAA airline routes to India and allocate that to Jet Airways. Then there was Fake Mento also talking about what the Guptas were trying to do to her. But there's one incident that still sticks out in my head, and that is there was a BRICS summit taking place in Durban, and I was watching it on SABC, and the program manager announced that, in fact, the heads of states were now walking in, and this is the head of state of South Africa, China, India, and Brazil walking into the room. And I just looked at that picture on my TV screen, and I saw them being led into the room by Tony Gupta, or one of the Gupta brothers. And I thought, this is so unacceptable, because this is a foreign national, maybe xenophobic now, and person who's not even part of government leading a delegation of heads of state. I mean, this is a function that should have been performed either by the deputy president of the country, minister of foreign affairs, or the DG of foreign affairs at the time. But here was an outsider leading a delegation of presidents into a room full of business leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And I then decided this is totally unacceptable and I must speak out. And that's when I moved from being a defiant young activist defying the most powerful politician at the time to becoming a whistleblower. And that's when I decided to actually speak to the media, because, I mean, I'd been talking to journalists about my story, but I was not willing to go public. It's when I observed these events that I decided, this is it, I'm going to speak out. I didn't decide to be a whistleblower. I decided to speak out I earned the title of being a whistleblower much later on because I wasn't even sure that it was a correct term to describe what I was doing. Because in my head, I was just exposing corruption. I was exposing the fact that our revolution was being hijacked by a family of 4 brothers, the Gupta family, because of their influence over the head of state, Zuma, at the time. And I decided to speak out. And that's when the title whistleblower actually stuck to me.
I have a question here from Omololu Fagba. Thank you, Mr. Maseko, for these insightful revelations of your encounter with the Guptas. My worry is that what happened to the various oversight and accountability structures and measures to the point that an individual could have such a hold on the government. That's from Omololu. Let me see what, another one from Lungisa Malawi. What was going through you when you accepted meeting the invite from the Guptas? They were not in government. How did you feel about this at that moment?
Let me start with the last question. Is it Mulolu?
Lungisa Malawi. Yes.
Oh yeah, that one.
Lungisa, yeah.
In my head. What was going through my head? Look, as a public servant, I believe that it was important for me to interact with all stakeholders. So I met with media organization, media owners, editors, publishers, journalists. So I had a relationship with all of them because I thought it was an important part of my job to just interact with stakeholders. But when this particular came, there were already rumors that they were setting up a media company. And I just wanted to hear, because I was hearing all kinds of rumors. I wanted to hear what Ajay Gupta wanted to talk to me about. The call from Zuma, as I was driving out of the office building, my GCIS office building, was the biggest worry for me because I said, what the hell does this mean? That this man must have known that I was going to meet Ajay Gupta. And part of me said, maybe Ajay Gupta asked Zuma to call me so that he can demonstrate to me that he's got influence or control over Zuma. I worried about if that was correct, if my gut feeling was correct, why would a president of a country agree to make a call to a civil servant about a meeting to meet another business person, especially in the sequence of events when I was already on my meeting to there. So I went through all kinds of issues in my head. And as I said earlier on, part of me said, maybe I should just walk away from the job and not even go to the meeting. But the better part of me, I think, said, go to the meeting and hear what this meeting was about. Even more interesting was at the end of the meeting, when I was feeling, please excuse my language, heartful after meeting Ajay Gupta. I said, what do I do? I firstly called my minister and told him what had just happened. Part of me said, go to Luthuli House because this was an irregularity of major proportion. Go and report this matter to Luthuli House. But I said, my God, how do I go to Luthuli House to report something that involves the CEO or the boss of that office, who is the president of the ANC? And I decided, I spoke to one or two of my friends who said, you're wasting your time, don't even go there. So those were the thoughts that were going through my head. And I knew that by defying Zuma and Gupta, Ajay Gupta, I was putting my career in the line. But God, I knew that I'd rather put my career in the line than sell my soul to two families that were bent on stealing money from the public coffers.
So your decision to count the second question, yes, yeah.
Yeah, the second question was, what happened to the oversight structures? I mean, yeah, that's a question I deal with in my book as well, because I mean, the first one was the NEC, political oversight internally within the ANC. The NEC became a hopeless lapdog. They failed to get Zuma to account. There were numerous meetings that took place where they discussed the issue of state capture, and they just got into denial until very late in the day when pressure was emerging from civil society, from the masses, and from whistleblowers and the media. That's when the ANC started dealing with this issue. But the question arises about Parliament. What did Parliament do? Because that's the main oversight structure. And unfortunately, Parliament was also made up of NEC members of the ANC, many MPs who were loyal to former President Zuma and who were prepared to bend in all directions to defend him. This issue of state capture and Zuma's relationship with the Guptas, if you go to the videos in Parliament when this matter was debated, and sadly, many of the tough questions were raised by opposition parties, your EFF, your DA, and we saw senior ANC members defending Zuma in that very same Parliament. And I think that history will still judge a lot of those leaders very harshly because they actually turned a blind eye or looked the other way when in fact they were supposed to be playing an oversight role. So when your Parliament lets you down like that, you have very little or very few options left for you to raise this matter sharply at a political level. So, yeah.
Themba, your decision to speak out, came at a huge cost to you and your family, and you have stated that you soon became a professional, political, and social leper, which is a very profound statement. How did this ostracism affect you and your family, and how did you cope with the pain of being an outcast?
Well, that was the most difficult part of writing the book because I was sharing my inner feelings, my emotions, my experiences, things that I'm sure even my family was very uncomfortable to read about. The challenges, the difficulties that we had to go through. Firstly, I mean, the political isolation that you experience. People don't return your calls. Your phone stops ringing completely. You stop getting invited. You no longer get invitations to golf days, to rallies, to meetings, to dinners, and all those kinds of things. People are, in a sense, willing to support you in private, but in public will shun you and not want to be seen, to be associated with somebody who actually exposed their leader, the president. The impact on family, I think it's mainly the isolation that we experience, but also the financial pressures. I mean, to spend a whole decade without a formal job, with no income, the inability to even raise funding to get a loan from a bank, personal loan. You can't get a loan to fund a business from the financial institutions, both public and private, because you're seen as a political risk. You also can't show any pure proof of income or something like that. So you can't raise businesses to start your own business. So you can't get a job. You can't raise funds to start your own business. So you are basically left on your own. There are obviously security considerations as well. So you spend sleepless nights thinking about your safety, the safety of your family. So it becomes tough to be, well, it was even worse because I was on one of the very few who had spoken out. So that was a very tough decade for me and my family. But I think that we will come through. We will come through. But it was a tough moment.
A question from Saeed Mohammed. Despite the unconditional love and support of your parents, there was another inner power that didn't want you to give up, given all the challenges that came through. What kept you moving? What was inner power that kept you moving?
I think that when your outlook, your philosophical outlook as an individual is to be of service to your nation, to your people, to your country, and spending all your youth as an activist fighting apartheid, I think build something inside of you that says it's for everything you do is for your country. Sometimes the darker side of that is that you end up not paying enough attention to your personal needs and your family. But what was the overall drive for me is to just do the right thing, if that right thing is for the good of my country and my people. And that's what kept me going. I just said, I'd rather do the right thing and end up in difficulties than do the wrong thing and spend the rest of my life waiting for a knock on my door from either the police or this and that. So for me, doing the right thing was the overriding consideration. And many people have asked me, would I do it again? Yes, I would do it again. Maybe I'd spend more time thinking about implications, preparing my family, making sure that I have a war chest of resources that I can tap into during difficult times. So I'll plan differently, but whether I would have agreed to cooperate with Zuma and the Guptas, there is no shade of a doubt in my head that I will do it again. I will refuse to cooperate with them.
You presented a detailed testimony to the Zondo Commission. And in the first part of the report, the commission found that state capture would have not been enabled at GCIS if you had not been axed by former President Zuma. How does that make you feel? Do you feel vindicated?
Vindicated, yes. I think that's the key word. I think that the pain and the suffering that I've put my family through has not been in vain. I think that the biggest benefit, though, is not a personal one. It's the benefit to the country that we will know better. Once the final report is out, we will know better about what really happened during the period of state capture, who were the parties involved in looting and stealing from the poor, who were the people who facilitated the looting, and how did they do it? And most importantly, will they face the consequences for it? So I think that at a personal level, I will feel content and know that I've made a contribution, I've made a difference. Obviously not as an individual, many people have done so. But yeah, I feel vindicated. I feel that in fact, it was not all in vain.
Themba, some people have expressed concerns that the Zondo Commission reports will not lead to prosecutions. And there have also been concerns raised about the National Prosecuting Authority as to whether it's up to the task of undertaking this massive responsibility of prosecuting those who have been implicated in wrongdoing. What's your view on this assertion? And perhaps if you can also explain how you think the National Prosecuting Authority could be bolstered to ensure that those implicated in state capture and corruption are held to account.
Look, I share the skepticism that some people have, especially the fact that it has taken too long to bring those implicated in the Zondo Commission and many other commissions to be brought to book and be held accountable. So the concerns are valid. I remain optimistic, and I base my optimism on watching Batohi, the head of NPA, speaking, the head of SIU, the head of the Hawks. I think that we've got finally the right people in the right places, people who have their heart in the right place, who want to do the right thing. I think prosecutions will happen. They may not happen as quickly as we want them to, but I think they will happen. I'm confident, because if they don't, that will constitute the biggest indictment on future generations, because these are people who have stolen from the poor. We have unemployment, we have poverty, we have inequality, we have shortage of electricity, potholes, schools that are not functioning properly. We're not able to provide good health service to our communities. A lot of it has to do with the theft that took place. And many people still don't make the connection between corruption and the fact that you wake up at night and you can't switch on your lights. There's a direct link between the two. So if we fail to hold those who are responsible for this corruption accountable, it's an indictment not just on us, but on future generations. And I make the point that in various interviews that the best gift that President Cyril Ramaphosa can give to this nation is to make sure that they allocate resources to the NPA so that it can build the capacity to prosecute these cases. People must understand that the reason why the Zondo Commission was able to do the kind of detailed investigation it did was because of the resources that were allocated to it. The fact that it is estimated that they got something close or above R1 billion made it possible for the Zondo Commission to get the best possible investigators, the best advocates, to actually deal with those cases during the commission proceedings. The NPA requires something more than what the Zondo Commission get, because it's a project that we have to do. We have to hold those who have stolen from us accountable. And the only way that can be done is if President Ramaphosa says, I am giving instructions to National Treasury to give R1 billion to the NPA. Let the NPA go and appoint prosecutors, accountants, investigators to take these costs, because you see, all of this good evidence coming from the Zondo Commission still needs to be translated into charge sheets. There needs to be winnable cases that can be presented before a judge. And the worst thing that the NPA can do is to present weak cases that can be thrown out in court. So detailed work needs to happen. Yes, I agree. There's something that needs to be said about the pace. It needs to move quicker, but I think something needs to be done. And government can do things to demonstrate their commitment. For instance, chasing after the Guptas who are stuck in Dubai. More than 2 years ago, there was an application to extradite them to come to the country. I don't know what has happened to that. There are things that are possible, quick wins that can be done now. But at the end of the day, in the next few months, we need to see progress in people being hauled before courts and being charged for stealing money during the state capture years. But I remain confident that, in fact, it's possible, but it needs political will. And the person who can make it happen is President Ramaphosa. And I'm making a call to him. I have, and I will continue to do so. Give this nation a gift by allocating resources to the NPA so that those who stole from us can be prosecuted as a matter of agency.
A question from Jerim Timkulu. Would you agree that for a country to completely heal from the harm, political, economic, and social harm caused by state capture, it may have to vote the ANC out of power? That's from Jerim Timkulu.
That's a difficult one. It's the voters must decide. I think that we have to. I remain optimistic that South Africans are mature enough to make the right choices when they get to the voting polls. It's one thing to complain about water leaks, shortage of housing, not working traffic lights, and yet when you go to the polls, we see the same results happening as we've seen over the past 27 years. So I think that we are likely to see voters beginning to vote with their access and demonstrating that they need things to improve, they need change. And the voting trends over the past few elections, local government and national, are demonstrating a trend of discontent, especially in the urban areas. Rural areas, they still seem to be maintaining a same trend of voting. But in the end, I think that we need to leave it to the voters. It's not for me to say people must vote this or that political party out. I think let's leave that to the voters. Voters must make the right choice.
Themba, now you're at Wits, back to your alma mater, Wits University, where you've been appointed as director of the Executive Development Unit at the Wits School of Governance. What has it been like returning to your alma mater, and how have you settled into your new job?
I must say I love it. This is my first formal job in a while. I'm able to go after a very long time. I'm able to go somewhere now and say, when they say a proof of income, I can produce a piece of paper to say I'm now earning. The difficulty, though, is the fact that starting a new job during a pandemic is not the easiest thing. I mean, I've walked into those offices and find that people are still working from home. So as you know, if you start a new job, human interaction is an important part of acclimatizing and getting used to the work environment. But I'm getting the hang of it. I'm enjoying it. I'm looking forward to, I think this is my new calling. I'm looking forward to playing a role of contributing to improving the capacity of this country to be a better nation than what we've seen over the past 27 years. And I think that training and development is absolutely vital. And the fact that I'll be through the Wits School of Government, particularly the Executive Development Unit, I'll be able to help design courses that will give hard core skills to people who are in administration now, who are hungry for skills. I will be able to make sure that we incorporate issues of integrity and ethics into each and every course that we provide, so that we can begin to develop and support a new cadre of public servants who will begin to show greater loyalty to the Constitution and not to a political party, to the Constitution, be willing to provide a service to this nation, and make sure that we are driven not by a desire to make money, but to become very good public servants. Because if our public servants, not just at the top, remember, a lot of corruption happens below ministers, DGs, and directors. It's at the lower levels of the system. That's where we need to target, train those people, and make sure that people don't go in there to make an extra buck, but go in there to provide good quality service in our schools, hospitals, offices, home affairs, police departments, everywhere. So playing that role of improving the capacity of our country, of the state, I think is a very exciting opportunity for me, and I'm looking forward and very grateful and thankful to Wits for giving me this opportunity.
Themba, it's exciting to hear that, but somebody might retort and say that unless there is a political will, there is political leadership that will ensure that South Africa establishes a professional, ethical, competent state. No amount of training and development programs that produced by learning institutions such as the Wits School of Governance will actually make an impact. What, in your view, what would it take in terms of political leadership in this country? If you were to give President Ramaphosa advice on how to build a capable state, what would it take for him to do that?
Well, I think that we face so many challenges, and I don't think that we have the luxury of waiting for that political will to happen. So I think that all of us in our different work environments have got to take the initiative, grab the bull by the horns, and begin to do things that will make a difference in the life of our citizens. If I were to get 30 minutes with President Ramaphosa, I'll demand that I get the key and throw it away and make sure I end up with 2 hours. One of the first things I'll say to him, Mr. President, one of the most important challenges we face in this country is skills at all levels of government. And one way of addressing that is to introduce the element of meritocracy into our recruitment processes, so that we begin to get the right kind of people, especially young people with qualifications and degrees, into important positions. Remember, positions is not just about being a minister or a DG. There are many positions in all levels of government that need to be filled with skilled people. And we must stop appointing people on the basis of political party membership, especially at a time when we are beginning to see coalition governments emerging in municipalities, in provinces, and in national government. So our political leaders need to wake up and say, let's adopt meritocracy, so that if you're a DA mayor, nothing should stop you from appointing somebody associated with the ANC historically. But if that person has the skill and their heart is in the right place to serve, you can appoint them. The ANC must do the same. EFF must appoint people not because they wear red things, but because they have the skills and the experience to actually play a particular role. Secondly, one of the things that I think are having a negative impact in our competence as government is just the need to deal with the issue of lack of security of tenure, especially for senior officials in government. I mean, the fact that our DGs are now appointed for a 3-year term contract is actually close to being ridiculous, because what you are expecting, let's say we need to recruit people from the private sector. You can't expect a manager on a full-time job in the private sector to leave a permanent job and assume a job in government for a 3-year contract. It's not going to happen. But again, for somebody to be appointed for 3 years, it takes, let me tell you, I've been a DG, it will take you more than 8 months to just understand what the hell you're supposed to do as a DG. And by that time, you're left with a year and a half to actually do what you're actually expected to do. So in dealing with the issue of security of tenure, I think it's something that needs to be looked at. A decision must be made now to say DGs are appointed for 5 years. And I can tell you, it will make a difference because we're losing so many good quality people who are not able to actually stay in these jobs because of this one issue. Thirdly, we need to review the legal framework just to make sure that we clarify the role of ministers and DGs, because this country is losing too much time worrying about resolving conflicts between ministers and DGs. Look at what's happening in the police service. We've got crime, we've got GBV taking place in all parts of the country, and yet our Minister of Police and the Commissioner are not seeing eye to eye, they're not meeting and all of those kinds of things. So you got to sort out the issue of the framework, the legal framework, so that we clarify these roles, so that this whole issue of political and administrative interface is dealt with as a matter of agency. I think that we need to introduce professionalism in the public service by changing the way in which DGs are appointed, because at the moment, DGs are interviewed by ministers, recommended to the president, but there isn't enough attention paid to meritocracy and making sure that the appointment process is objective. And my view in this regard is that we need to explore the possibility of delegating this function to the Public Service Commission, get professionals to run the process of recruiting the best possible people to run departments, so that we take it away from the politicians who may be informed by or considering very narrow issues to get a DG appointed, instead of making sure that we get the right people as DGs of departments, then introducing ethics in all aspects of public service. And I think that's going to be done through training, and then making sure that there's accountability and consequence management in government. So if somebody doesn't perform, minister, DG, director, those people need to be held accountable and actually be fired. If somebody is not performing, they need to be removed from their jobs, because we've lost in many areas, we've lost 27 years of service delivery. So we need to make sure that we actually up our game. That would be the end of my 10 minutes with the president.
Yeah. All right. We're moving towards closure. A few minutes left, Themba. I want to take a question from Buhlebezwe, which is, would you consider working for government again as a director general or minister if given an opportunity?
Oh, Buhlebezwe, I think I've been considered to be a pariah or an enemy of the state. I think that the state would not be ready to employ somebody like me. And I think that the academic space, I must confess, is looking more and more attractive to me, because it will give me the space to research and find solutions and go study models in other parts of the world, so that I can impart my knowledge and experience to a much bigger pool of people, instead of just sitting in a desk and working. And I think that we've got enough, I'm no longer young, by the way, we've got enough young people that we can, as universities, train and prepare and put into the public service to make sure that they can deliver services. Because if I go in there now, I'm closing space for a young graduate who could actually be coming in through the system to get the opportunity to serve. And my view is also based on the fact that I've been waiting for the call or a knock on my door for an opportunity like that to come. It never materialized. And I'm kind of giving up on it.
Yeah. Themba, are there any key leadership lessons that you learned as a public servant that you'd like to impart to the next generation of leaders?
Our leadership lessons, I jotted a few points down because I knew the question was going to come. I think that as a leader, you got to have values that you hold so dear to your life, and that informs everything that you do, both in your professional and private life. And those values, the most important for me, are integrity and ethical conduct. So that in my view, is an important lesson that I've learned. Secondly, is to have clarity of mind about why you're doing a particular job. As a public servant, you got to do it not because you want to become a billionaire, because you don't become a billionaire as a person who serves the public, but you got to do it because you are driven by a desire to improve the lives of ordinary people who have less opportunities than you are doing. So that's what I've learned, and I think this lesson will apply in the public sector, in the private sector as well. Thirdly, I would say you got to surround yourself with smart people, bright people, especially people who are smarter than you if you're managing a team. And that's a lesson I learned during my days as the person who started the Gauteng Department of Education. I had not run an education department before, but I found the best candidates from the Black, Colored, Indian, African departments and brought them to be my team because I knew they knew better than me about what needed to be done. And all I had to do was to manage them as a team. So surrounding yourself with good, smart people who are not scared to ask you tough questions is an important lesson. Communication with staff, with your colleagues, with your superiors, and most importantly, the citizens and members of the public. I think absolutely vital that you open lines of communication. People must know what your goals, what your vision, what your objectives are, what you're trying to get them to do. And unless you share those thoughts and also get feedback from them, chances are that you're not going to make a good leader. The importance of respecting yourself as an individual, because it defines your behavior, but also respecting those around you. I think it's an important lesson. And then managing, you got to learn to manage egos. You know, the work environment, there's all kinds of egos that you have to deal with. Firstly, learn to manage your own ego because we all have egos, but then manage people around you who may also have ego issues. And for you to build a team, you got to be able to manage those egos. And then finally, speaking truth to power. If there's something wrong happening in your work environment, speak out, don't keep quiet. And that's what makes you a better person.
All right, Themba, last question and then we close. You know, when you were born, your parents named you Themba, which means hope or trust in English. Yeah. Do you think you have lived up to the meaning of this name? You know, when you look back over your life, you know, do you think you've lived up to the meaning?
I think my parents were very smart for giving me the name.
Yeah.
Because I am where I am today largely because of, I've always looked at the positive side of life. I always look for the brighter things. I always hope that the next day will be better. If I meet a bad person today, I always tell myself the next person I meet is going to be better. So I always hope. And the other part of the name is also trust. I have an inclination to trust people as I meet them. And people, if you demonstrate that you trust them, you treat them with trust, chances are that in fact they will reciprocate. So I think I've lived to my name to the best of my ability. Obviously, if I get another chance at this life, maybe I could improve, but I think I have lived to my name.
Yeah. All right. That's how we come to the end of this afternoon's conversation with our guest, Themba Maseko. Themba, thanks hugely for sharing with us such fascinating, inspiring and instructive insights. And thanks for your leadership and patriotism. And also thank you for your courageous and selfless service to our country and nation. We are indebted to you and other courageous individuals who have put their lives in danger in the interest of safeguarding our fragile democracy. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to recommend this book. I'm doing a pitch now for Themba, a fantastic, riveting book for my country. It's available from bookshops, exclusive in other bookshops, and it's a really, really inspiring read. In closing, I would like to thank everyone in the audience who attended and participated in this event. I would like to thank in particular my colleagues at Wits Business School who have worked behind the scenes to make this event a reality. Jane Balnevs, Jaytin Carson, Alison Gayward, Rutendo Ngumalo, Themba Maseko, and Ikeleng Ramayema. Thank you everyone, and good evening. See you. Appreciate your participation. And thank you, Themba.
Thank you, Mills, and thanks to all the
Thank you, everyone.
participants.
All right.
Thank you.